My name is Callista Monroe, and I'm 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed that family problems were loud things. Screaming matches, slammed doors, holidays ruined in spectacular fashion. I was wrong. Some of the most damaging family wounds happen quietly, politely, with smiles and excuses and just enough plausible deniability to make you question your own instincts. I'm married to Mark Monroe, and together we have 3 kids. Our twins, Harper and Mason, are 10, bright, energetic, inseparable. Our youngest, Logan, is 8, thoughtful and observant in that way youngest children often are. We live in a close-knit suburban neighborhood in Ohio, the kind of place where school districts are discussed like religion, where block parties double as networking events, and where children's birthday parties are social currency, whether anyone admits it or not. Mark's sister, Amberly Westbrook, married Troy 9 years ago. From the outside, they had everything: a sprawling house with white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges, 2 luxury SUVs in the driveway, annual vacations documented meticulously on social media, sunset photos, coordinated outfits, captions about gratitude and blessings. Amberly curated her life like a brand, and for a long time, I thought that was harmless. They had 2 children, Paige, 1 year older than the twins, and Bennett, a year younger. At holidays, the kids played together. At family gatherings, everything seemed normal enough, which is why I didn't panic the first time something felt off. Paige was turning 6. We lived 4 streets away. Our kids attended the same school. I assumed an invitation would arrive. It didn't. I told myself it was nothing. Mail gets lost, emails go to spam, life happens. At a family cookout later that summer, I mentioned it casually. "Hey, Amberly, we never got Paige's party invitation," I said, balancing a paper plate in one hand, forcing a light tone. "Oh," she said, waving dismissively. "We kept it really small this year, just her classmates." It sounded reasonable. I accepted it. I wish I hadn't. Weeks later, I learned through another cousin that Paige's party had over 50 kids, bounce houses, a petting zoo, nearly every child in our neighborhood. Everyone except mine. That night, I asked Mark about it. "Did you know Paige's party had like 50 kids?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. He frowned. "She told me it was small." That was the first time the unease settled in my chest. But I still didn't confront it. 7 months later, Bennett's birthday came. No invitation. Same excuse. Same reality. That was when I started paying closer attention. Amberly was always pleasant, to me, smiling, polite, friendly enough to avoid confrontation. But with my children, she barely looked at them. When Harper showed her a drawing from art class, Amberly nodded once and turned away. When Mason asked her questions, her responses were clipped, distracted. I noticed. My kids noticed. One night after Thanksgiving, Harper asked me a question that broke something inside me. "Mom," she said quietly, "why doesn't Aunt Amberly like us?" I knelt in front of her, heart pounding. "What makes you think that?" "She talks to Paige and Bennett all the time, but not us, and we never get invited to their parties like everyone else." She was 10 years old, and she was right. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was coincidence. I told myself children were resilient, that kids forgot faster than adults, that if we didn't make a big deal out of it, Harper and Mason would move on. That was the lie I used to sleep at night. But children don't need explanations to feel rejection. They feel it in patterns, in absences, in the way names are missing from conversations everyone else seems to be having. After Bennett's birthday passed without an invitation, the twins stopped asking if they were going. They started asking why they never did, and every time I had no answer that didn't taste like a lie. Family gatherings became exercises in observation. I watched Amberly closely, how she laughed louder when Paige spoke, how she crouched to listen attentively when Bennett tugged her sleeve. Then I watched how her eyes slid past my kids like they were furniture. She was never cruel. That was the worst part. Cruelty would have been easier to confront. Instead, she was politely absent. At Christmas, Harper tried to show Amberly a science project she was proud of, an elaborate solar system made from painted foam balls. "That's nice, sweetie," Amberly said, already turning away. Harper stood there holding the project long after Amberly had walked off. I wanted to scream. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, while Mark rinsed dishes at the sink. "This isn't in your head," he said quietly, without turning around. I looked up. "You've noticed?" He nodded once. "She barely acknowledges them." "Then why hasn't she said anything? Why lie about party sizes?" Mark sighed, drying his hands. "I don't know, but it's not okay." The next morning, I asked him to talk to her. Not angrily, not confrontationally, just honestly. He called her that afternoon. When he came home, his shoulders were tense in that way that meant he was trying not to explode. "She says it's about logistics," he told me. "Budgets, managing chaos, keeping things controlled." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Controlled?" I said. "She rents event centers." "I know. And yet somehow 3 kids ruin the atmosphere?" He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. If money wasn't the issue, and space wasn't the issue, then there was only one explanation left. She didn't want our kids there. And once that realization took root, everything else snapped into focus. The way Amberly talked about raising children with standards. The way she emphasized structure and image. The way her parties weren't just celebrations, but performances. Year 3 was when my denial finally died. Paige was turning 9. Amberly rented the Riverside Event Center downtown. Princess performers, a petting zoo, face painters, ponies, actual ponies. Every child in the extended family received a gold-embossed invitation. Every child, except mine. Harper came home from school one afternoon with red eyes and a clenched jaw. "Mom," she said, trying to sound brave, "everyone's talking about Paige's party this weekend." I froze. "Yeah?" I asked carefully. "There are going to be ponies. Kyle said the magician was on TV. Her voice cracked. "All our cousins are going." I pulled her into my arms, my chest burning. "I don't know why," I whispered honestly. That night, I didn't wait for Mark. I called Amberly myself. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. "We need to talk," I said the moment she answered. "Why are my children never invited to your kids' parties?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Callista, I've explained this." "Stop," I interrupted. "You rented an entire event hall. You have ponies. Don't lie to me." Another pause, longer this time. "Well," she said finally, "if I'm being honest, your kids can be a bit much." I stopped breathing. "A bit much?" I repeated. "They're loud. They don't always follow instructions. Paige's parties have a certain atmosphere I try to maintain." I was speechless. "They're children," I said slowly. "Happy, energetic children. I'm just saying they're not as well behaved as some of the other kids." That was it. No more excuses. No more plausible deniability. "You're excluding them because you've decided they're not good enough," I said. She bristled. "I have every right to invite whoever I want." "You do," I agreed. "And I won't forget that." I hung up shaking. When Mark came home and I told him exactly what she'd said, I watched his face change. Red, tight, furious. "She said what?" he asked. "That our kids aren't well behaved enough for her parties." He didn't hesitate. He called her immediately. I could hear her through the speaker, backpedaling, minimizing, reframing. Mark snapped. "If our kids aren't good enough for your parties," he said, voice shaking with anger, "then yours aren't coming to ours anymore." "That's childish," she said coldly. "What's childish is excluding your own niece and nephews for years because you think you're better than everyone else." He hung up. We sat there in silence. "What do we tell the kids?" I asked softly. He exhaled. "The truth. That some people confuse image with values." The exclusion didn't stop, but something else did. My kids stopped asking. They stopped wondering. They stopped hoping. And somehow, that quiet acceptance hurt more than anything else ever had. The strange thing about boundaries is that people don't notice them until you enforce one. For 3 years, Amberly had drawn hers clearly, quietly, politely, without ever admitting she was doing it. And for 3 years, we had absorbed the damage quietly, convincing ourselves that keeping the peace mattered more than acknowledging the harm. Until it didn't. The twins' 10th birthday was approaching, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something other than dread when I thought about a party. Harper and Mason had begged for a bowling and arcade celebration at Thunderstrikes, a loud, chaotic place filled with flashing lights, pizza grease, and shrieking laughter. Exactly the kind of place Amberly would have described as too much. We went all out. 60 kids, their entire 5th grade class, neighbors, cousins, family friends. For once, I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't trim the guest list to avoid discomfort. I didn't wonder who might be offended. I focused on my children. 2 weeks before the party, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. Amberly's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a full 3 seconds before answering. "Hey, Callista," she said brightly, like nothing had ever happened. "I just wanted to confirm that Paige and Bennett are invited to the twins' party." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "I'm sorry, what?" I said. "The party," she repeated, irritation creeping in. "In 2 weeks. I need to know for planning." I took a breath, slow, deliberate. "Let me ask you something, Amberly. How many of our kids' birthday parties have Paige and Bennett been invited to over the years?" "Well, you haven't really had many big parties lately, have you?" "That's not true," I said flatly. "We've had 4. They were invited to all of them. They attended one." Silence. "And now," I continued, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "after excluding my children from every single one of yours for 3 years, you're calling to make sure yours are included?" "It's not like that," she said quickly. "My parties have very specific guest lists. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal." "You excluded my children for 3 years," I said. "That's personal." "Well," she snapped, "maybe if you taught them better manners, they'd be more welcome at sophisticated events." That was the moment, the final straw. "You know what?" I said quietly. "No, Paige and Bennett are not invited." "What?" she demanded. "You've made it clear for years that my kids aren't welcome at your parties, so yours won't be at ours." "You can't be serious," she said. "They're family." "Exactly," I replied. "Something you seem to remember only when it benefits you." She hung up on me. Within an hour, the fallout began. Mark's phone lit up first, then mine. Amberly had gone straight to his mother, Ruth, sobbing about how cruel and vindictive I was being to her innocent children. Ruth called me almost immediately. "Callista, dear," she said gently. "Amberly is absolutely distraught. She says you're excluding Paige and Bennett." "Did she mention she's excluded my kids from every party for 3 years?" I asked calmly. "She said she had to keep things small. Her parties have 60 to 70 kids," I said. "She told me directly that my children aren't well behaved enough." There was a pause. "I didn't know that," Ruth said quietly. "Exactly," I replied. Ruth promised to talk to Amberly. It didn't help. The very next day, Amberly showed up at our house with Troy. They stood on our porch like they were about to negotiate a hostile takeover. "We need to talk," Troy said, his tone clipped and professional. "There's nothing to talk about," Mark replied, stepping forward. "You excluded our kids for years. Now you're upset we're doing the same." "It's not the same thing," Amberly snapped. "Our parties are curated." "You invite everyone except our kids," I shot back. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "your children have behavioral issues." Mark stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "What issues?" he demanded. "Name one," she faltered. "They're loud. They're children," he said incredulously. "Not at sophisticated events." I laughed. "They're birthday parties," I said, "not charity galas." Troy bristled. "This is uncalled for." "Is it?" I asked. "Because your wife told me to my face my kids weren't good enough." They left angry. And Amberly immediately launched a campaign. Calls, texts, tears. She painted herself as the victim, excluded out of jealousy, punished for success. Some family members believed her. Mark's Aunt Francine called to lecture us about forgiveness and unity. "Those poor children don't deserve this," she scolded. "Neither did ours," I replied, "for 3 years." Others, once they heard the truth, were horrified. Mark's brother Vincent called us that night. "She's been doing this for years?" he asked. "Every single party," Mark said. "That's messed up," Vincent muttered. I had no idea. The party came and went. It was incredible. Loud, chaotic, joyful. And for the first time in years, there was no tension, no polite avoidance, no watching our kids wonder why they didn't belong. They belonged. But the fallout didn't end there. At the next family gathering, Amberly wouldn't speak to us. She kept Paige and Bennett close, watching them like hawks. Ruth tried to smooth things over. Amberly refused. Then, about a month later, something unexpected happened. I ran into a woman named Sophia Martinez at Target, a mom from school. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said quietly. "About Amberly." My stomach dropped. "She's been doing this to other families too," Sophia continued, "excluding kids, creating some kind of hierarchy." I stared at her. "How many?" "At least 8, she said. "Probably more." And just like that, the story stopped being about us. Once the truth was out, it spread faster than Amberly ever could have controlled. What surprised me most wasn't that other families had been excluded. It was how systematic it had been. Over coffee dates, school pickup conversations, whispered talks during soccer practice. The same story kept repeating. Different kids, different parties, same pattern. Amberly's invitations weren't about friendship. They were auditions. Sophia Martinez introduced me to a few other parents. At first, everyone spoke cautiously, like they were confessing something shameful. "My son thought he did something wrong," one mom admitted, eyes glossy. "My daughter asked if we weren't rich enough," another said quietly. That sentence lodged in my chest like a splinter. Rich enough. This wasn't about children at all. It was about status. Amberly had been quietly sorting families into categories, those who elevated her image and those who didn't. Her parties weren't celebrations. They were social statements. The more people talked, the harder it became for her to deny. Parents started comparing notes, and once they did, the illusion shattered. Within weeks, several families confronted Amberly directly. She reacted the same way every time. Defensive, indignant, insisting she was being misunderstood. But it's hard to argue coincidence when 8 different families share the same experience. The school administration got involved after formal complaints were filed, not about parties, but about the impact. Children crying in bathrooms, social rifts forming in classrooms, kids internalizing the idea that they weren't good enough. The principal sent out a carefully worded email reminding parents of the school's anti-bullying policies and encouraging inclusivity in extracurricular social events. No names were mentioned. Everyone knew exactly who it was about. Amberly was mortified. For the first time since I'd known her, her social media went quiet. No party photos, no inspirational captions. And then the consequences reached closer to home. Paige started having trouble at school. Kids stopped inviting her to play dates. Birthday invitations dried up. She'd been unintentionally cast as the symbol of her mother's behavior. One evening, my phone rang. "Amberly." She was crying. "Paige is being bullied," she sobbed. "She's miserable. Kids are excluding her." I closed my eyes. "She's not being bullied," I said gently. "She's experiencing consequences." "How can you say that?" she demanded. "She didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did my kids," I replied, "and that didn't stop you from excluding them for 3 years." "I'm asking you to help fix this," she said desperately. "Talk to the other parents." "Why would I?" I asked honestly. There was a sharp inhale. "So you're just going to let an innocent child suffer?" "I let you handle the situation you created," I said. "That's not cruelty. That's accountability." She hung up on me. Troy tried next. He showed up unannounced at Mark's office. "This has gotten out of hand," Troy said, leaning forward. "We need to fix this, for the kids' sake." Mark folded his hands calmly. "I agree. Amberly should apologize to our children. Choice. She told my wife our kids weren't good enough, Mark said, voice steady. That's not about logistics. That's about superiority. Well, maybe she could have communicated better, Troy hedged. My kids suffered for 3 years, Mark replied. You didn't care then. Troy left. 2 months later, everything came to a head at Ruth's birthday dinner. The entire family gathered around a long table, tension thick enough to choke on. Amberly made pointed comments about forgiveness and loyalty, loud enough for everyone to hear. Finally, Vincent spoke. Can we address this directly, he said. Amberly, you excluded Callista and Mark's kids for years. That was wrong. And you excluded mine, Amberly shot back. Yes, Vincent said, in response. Can we all admit fault and move on? I'm not admitting fault, Amberly said immediately. I had legitimate reasons. Ruth looked at her carefully. What reasons? Amberly hesitated. I wanted nice parties for my kids. At the cost of making other children feel inferior? Ruth asked softly. I raised you better than that. Amberly's eyes darted around the table. I just wanted better opportunities for my kids. Opportunities to become snobs? I asked quietly. No one rushed to comfort her when she started crying. That was new. She offered an apology later, if you could call it that. I'm sorry if anyone's feelings were hurt. That's not an apology, Mark said. We left without resolution. But something had changed. Amberly's reputation had cracked. Parents stopped accepting her invitations. Her parties grew smaller, not by design, but by disinterest. Paige and Bennett eventually began getting invited to other kids' parties again. But Amberly wasn't welcome to linger and network the way she once had. And then, one afternoon at the library, I saw Paige alone. She looked smaller somehow. Hi, Paige, I said softly. She looked up, surprised. Hi, Aunt Callista. How's school? She shrugged, eyes filling. Some of my friends don't talk to me anymore. My heart ached. Is it because my mom didn't invite Harper and Mason? She asked quietly. I nodded. Partly. But it's not your fault. She nodded, wiping her face. That was when I realized something important. This was never about revenge. It was about finally refusing to absorb harm quietly. 6 months later, Amberly called me again. This time her voice was different. Can we talk? She asked. Really talk? We met at a coffee shop. She looked less polished, less certain. I've been in therapy, she admitted. I was wrong. She told me about growing up poor, about being excluded, about swearing her kids would never feel that way. And instead, she whispered, I became the person who made others feel small. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. 3 years later, things are quieter. Smaller parties, inclusive ones. We're not close, but our kids are welcome, and that's enough. For a long time after that coffee shop conversation, nothing dramatic happened. No shouting matches, no tearful family interventions, no miraculous overnight forgiveness. Just consequences. Slow, quiet, inescapable ones. Amberly didn't disappear from our lives, but her presence changed. At school events, she no longer held court in the center of every parent cluster. Conversations dimmed when she approached. Smiles became polite instead of eager. Parents remembered. They remembered the birthday invitations that never came, the excuses that didn't add up, the way their children had come home asking uncomfortable questions about worth and belonging, and they didn't forget easily. Her once elaborate parties continued, but attendance dwindled. What used to be 60 children became 20, then 15. Eventually, they really were small gatherings. Not because she wanted them that way, but because people stopped responding. Paige and Bennett, to their credit, tried to navigate the shift with more grace than most adults could have. Paige especially seemed to mature quickly. She stopped talking about parties altogether. She focused on school, on books, on the few friendships that had survived the fallout. Bennett followed her lead, quieter, more reserved. I watched them closely, my emotions tangled. I was angry at Amberly. I was protective of my own children, but I couldn't ignore the truth. Her kids were paying a price for something they hadn't chosen. One afternoon, Harper came home and mentioned Paige casually. She sat with me at lunch today, she said, shrugging. We talked about art. I froze. How did that feel? I asked carefully. Fine, Harper replied. She seemed sad. That night, I lay awake thinking about how children absorb adult mistakes like secondhand smoke. Quietly, permanently. Ruth tried again to repair the family dynamic. She organized Sunday dinners, group texts, carefully neutral invitations. Amberly attended, but she no longer dominated the room. She watched more, spoke less. Sometimes she looked like she was bracing for impact that never came. At one dinner, she finally spoke to me directly. I'm trying, she said softly, eyes lowered. I know that doesn't fix everything. I nodded. Trying matters. Consistency matters more. She swallowed hard. The real shift came the following spring. The school PTA elections rolled around, and for the first time in years, Amberly didn't run. She used to love those roles. The visibility, the influence. This time, she volunteered behind the scenes. Decorations, logistics, cleanup. It was humbling and noticeable. Parents accepted it cautiously. Some whispered that she was only doing damage control. Maybe she was. But damage control still required effort. The moment that surprised me most came unexpectedly. It was at Logan's soccer game. Amberly sat 2 rows behind me, quiet, hands folded in her lap. At halftime, Logan tripped and scraped his knee. Tears welled instantly. Before I could reach him, Amberly stood. She handed me a tissue without a word. No performative sympathy. No commentary. Just help. I thanked her. She nodded. That was it. Later that week, she sent me a message. I'm trying to show my kids different values now. It's harder than I thought. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Change usually is. What mattered most to me wasn't Amberly's social standing or reputation. It was my children, and I saw the difference. Harper stopped asking why she wasn't invited places. She started choosing her friends more deliberately. Mason grew more confident, less eager to prove himself worthy of attention. Logan, ever observant, asked one night, Mom, why did Aunt Amberly stop having big parties? I considered lying. Then I didn't. Because sometimes people learn that impressing others isn't the same as being kind. He nodded thoughtfully. That lesson stuck. About a year after everything first exploded, Ruth called a family meeting. No ambush, no accusations, just honesty. Amberly spoke first. I was wrong, she said, voice steady but quiet. Not just to Callista and Mark, to a lot of families. I cared more about image than people. She didn't cry. She didn't justify. She didn't say if. That mattered. I can't undo it, she continued, but I'm trying to do better. No one clapped. No one rushed to absolve her, but no one attacked her either. That silence was acceptance. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Later that night, Paige approached me. I'm sorry, she said shyly, for everything. I knelt down, meeting her eyes. You don't owe me an apology, I said gently. None of this was your responsibility. She smiled, relieved. By then, the damage had already reshaped our family, but not destroyed it. Amberly's life wasn't ruined. It was recalibrated. And that felt right, because consequences aren't about punishment. They're about correction. Time didn't erase what happened. It refined it. 3 years after the first confrontation, after the phone calls, the accusations, the tears, the forced apologies, and the slow reckoning, our family no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt quieter, not healed, not close, but honest. Amberly's parties really were small now, not curated, not themed for social media, not photographed obsessively from flattering angles, just backyard gatherings. Pizza boxes on folding tables, kids running barefoot through the grass. All the cousins were invited, every single one. The first time Harper held an invitation with Paige's name handwritten at the top, instead of printed in gold foil, she looked at me carefully. Is this real? She asked. Yes, I said. It is. She nodded once, thoughtfully. No excitement, no skepticism, just acceptance. That told me everything. Amberly had learned something most people never do, that rebuilding trust isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistency when no one is applauding. She volunteered at the school again, but quietly. No leadership roles, no spotlight. She showed up early and left late. Parents noticed, not because she demanded they do, but because patterns are hard to fake over time. Paige and Bennett changed too. Paige grew softer, more observant. She stopped leading conversations and started listening. Her friendships became fewer but deeper. Bennett found his footing through sports, soccer, then track. Places where status didn't matter as much as effort. Watching them, I felt something I didn't expect. Peace. Not because everything had been made right, but because nothing was being denied anymore. One afternoon, Harper came home from school and dropped her backpack by the door. "Mom," she said casually, "Paige apologized again today." "For what?" I asked. "For making people feel left out," she shrugged. She said she didn't understand it before. I swallowed. That apology mattered more than any adult one ever had. Amberly and I were never close again. We didn't text. We didn't confide. We didn't pretend to be best friends for the sake of family optics. We were cordial, respectful, careful, and that was enough. One evening, after a family dinner that passed without tension for the first time in years, Amberly lingered in the driveway as everyone else left. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For not pretending nothing happened," she said. "You forced me to see myself." I studied her for a moment. "That wasn't easy," I said, "for anyone." "I know," she replied, "but it was necessary." She paused, then added, "I thought being excluded made me strong when I was younger. I didn't realize it just taught me how to hurt others quietly." That was the truest thing she'd ever said. Mark noticed the change too. "You okay with how things turned out?" he asked me one night after the kids were asleep. I thought about it carefully. "Yes," I said, "because our kids learned something important." "What's that?" "That love doesn't mean tolerating harm," I said, "and boundaries aren't cruelty." Harper became more confident over time. She stopped shrinking herself to fit in. Mason stopped chasing approval. Logan, sweet, watchful Logan, learned early that fairness mattered more than popularity. They learned to stand up without becoming bitter, and that mattered to me more than any apology ever could. Sometimes I think back to the version of myself who kept rationalizing exclusion, who told herself to be patient, to be polite, to avoid conflict. I don't blame her. But I don't want to be her anymore, because silence doesn't keep the peace. It just keeps the damage invisible. Amberly's life didn't collapse. It adjusted. Her social circle became smaller, but more honest. Her children learned empathy the hard way. Her image shifted from admiration to accountability. And in the end, that was the most realistic resolution there could have been. Not revenge, not reconciliation wrapped in a bow, just consequences, and the choice to grow afterward. Today, when I watch our kids play together, laughing, arguing, forgiving, belonging, I know we did the right thing. Because inclusion isn't about invitations. It's about values. And values only matter when you're willing to defend them.